economics. In his current role at the European Commission, he is responsible for drafting the 2030 and 2040 energy scenarios and also to oversee the modeling behind the energy policies of the European Union. He's going to bring some crucial insights into the Affordable Energy Action Plan from an institutional perspective, but of course, the views that he's going to express today are his own. Next, we have Dimitar Lilkov, who's a senior research officer at the Wilfred Martens Center for European Studies. He focuses on energy, climate, and digital policies and has deep expertise in the European Energy Union, energy security, decarbonization, alongside some cutting-edge work into digital regulations, privacy, and the EU-China tech rivalry. He's also the host of the Martens Center's Brussels Bites podcast, where he talks about technology and EU policy. Last but not least, we have Otto Brons Petersen, who's an economist and director of analysis at Denmark's Center for Political Studies. His wide-ranging work covers economic policy, climate policy, energy economics, tax growth, and financial regulations. He's published a lot on everything that ranges from economics, political science, and even philosophy. And he's a regular columnist for two of Denmark's biggest newspapers. He's going to bring more of a free market perspective to our discussion today. The format is pretty straightforward. I'm going to start with a question on the Commission's current energy policy direction, and then I'm going to lead the debate with some guided questions. We're going to leave some time at the end, about 5 to 10 minutes for questions that you might have. So in case anything that there's anything that you want to ask, just make a mental note, and we're going to come back to that at the end. So Bert, I'm going to start with you. As a representative from the European Commission, could you please outline in just a few minutes the core objectives of the Affordable Energy Action Plan and tell us how it addresses the energy transition, but also the affordability for citizens?
Yeah, okay. Many thanks for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here. It's always good to discuss such topics at the early stage of this commission. And indeed, the commission is a bit more than 3 months old. It started the 1st of December. And one of the promises that were made when the President von der Leyen was appointed around summer was that she would come up with a strategy for the industry, and as well with the strategy or plan for the energy prices. And that's what we have done. We have done that before. The first 100 days were finalized. We proposed the Clean Industry Deal and the Affordable Energy Action Plan at the 26th of February. It builds on the ideas, to a large extent, on the ideas that were set out in the Draghi report, which is obviously a report that has received a lot of attention. And in both documents, in the Clean Industry Deal and obviously in the Affordable Energy Prices Action Plan, energy is central. So, what does the action plan say? Well, basically, if you look at it, it has a whole list of actions, and to a large extent, it sets the agenda of the Commission in the next few years. I mean, the Commission in the next 5 years, in a sense, and they can actually be grouped along 4 different items. One is on the energy transition, which is say the energy side of the Green Deal, and it makes the case. And in order to save money and in order to become less reliant on fossil fuels, because we should not forget that the energy crisis was not because of the energy transition, but because of the dependence on Russian gas, that in order to become more independent on imports from fossil fuels and more independent from, say, geopolitical games, we need to continue with the energy transition. The second one is about investments. Obviously, the transition is an investment agenda. And it actually announces a number of initiatives in order to make sure that the actors, also the private actors, because not only public money can help or can make the energy transition happen, that the financing is mobilized in order to have the right energy system that we need for the future and for the current and future economic competitiveness. The third set of elements is about well-functioning markets. We need to make sure that the EU, towards its importers, plays actually its weight. That we can really make sure that we get the best deal from our importers, that we work with reliable suppliers of fossil fuels, and that we get them at the best possible prices. But we also need to make sure that, say, internally, the electricity market is working effectively, efficiently, and actually can make sure that the electricity gets where and when it is needed, but also at the lowest possible prices, knowing that the energy transition has obviously a very important impact on the different actors in the electricity market. And the last one is on the energy security. And obviously, this is very much related with the lessons learned of in the energy crisis. And one of the first initiatives that will come by the Commission is indeed to revise, review, and update the energy security framework to the lessons learned during the energy crisis, and making more permanent what was done, what was actually decided by the Council under as part of the emergency framework. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Dimitar. So from your perspective at the Wilfried Martens Center, how do you assess the European Commission's current energy policy direction, especially when it comes to decarbonization and balancing that with the industrial competitiveness and energy security?
Thanks, Diana. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm also very happy that with Epicenter in this event, I find intellectual friends and colleagues, because I mean, my journey in the Martens Center and the Martens Center itself in the last couple of years has tried to push forward constructive criticism of the European Green Deal when it comes to improving the direction. We published this publication, A Better Deal for Climate and Competitiveness. You can find a copy late last year, so I won't go into the details, but we already had a blueprint for how to improve the Green Deal, and I'm slightly optimistic that these messages are picked up by the European Commission. A couple of very brief and general points on the global and European transition, and then I'll come back to the Affordable Energy Action Plan and also the Clean Industrial Deal. Tommy mentioned this, Bert mentioned this. We have a huge problem with the money, with financing the transition. Globally, I mean, estimates vary, but since 2010, the world has invested between 7 and 9 trillion euros in the energy transition. 7 to 9 trillion euros. Just to give you a point of reference, this is close to 10% of annual global GDP. So this is a huge amount of money, and one could make the case that this is the biggest amount of money with the lowest kind of returns, because in the last 15 years, globally, the world used in 2010, 2011, around 85% of its energy was fossil fuel energy. Right now, we are around 81, 82% fossil fuel energy. So we're investing huge amounts of money with lower yield, so to say. Also in the EU, for 2023, common EU 27 spending on climate reached 400 billion euros annually, which is 2.6% of our collective GDP. So it's an interesting mental reference point. We have been spending more money on climate than on defense. And from today's perspective, I think it's warranted to reevaluate maybe these priorities. And also, we have to say that is there an actual business case for the transition? Looking at what's happening in the last couple of years in terms of the pledges of the big companies, Tommy mentioned this, private sector investment has been dwindling. There's Standard & Poor's, the tracker of the stocks in clean energy companies. And since 2021, when we saw the biggest interest in these kind of clean energy stocks, they've been slowly dwindling and falling right now. Right now, they're at their levels 5 years ago. So we see that there's something wrong from the private sector side as well. So bottom line was that we were already seeing that when it comes to sustainability, it's financially and politically unsustainable here in the EU and also globally. So this is something we need to consider. We also saw a big reality check when it comes to renewables and the progress of renewables in the last couple of years. The EU, as one of the most ambitious actors in decarbonization, has registered around 1% of additional renewable energy every year, which is great, which is, again, extremely ambitious. But the questions remain whether we can actually achieve the 2030 goals when it comes to renewable energy. So I think a reality check is warranted. And what makes me slightly optimistic about the direction of the European Commission is that the words industry is back, the word growth is back, and I think it's the return of energy as a centerpiece of our future policy planning. Because let's be honest, in the last couple of years, we forgot about European Energy Union, we forgot about prices, we forgot about affordability, about the fact that we have 40 million people in the EU who cannot pay their energy bills. And these priorities were changed and replaced by climate. And when you put climate at the center of all these policies, things start getting a bit different. What was the saying about when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail? When you adopt climate as a centerpiece of your policy-making apparatus, everything starts to look problematic. Everything is about fossil fuels, it's about decarbonization, everything is about kind of resetting the economy. But this is, of course, very, very taxing and difficult to achieve. And a final word, because it is a political think tank, of course. Of course, the Green Deal was driven by Frans Timmermans, the socialists in parliament, the Greens. But I think the strategic mistake which these political forces, the progressive left specifically, tried to make in the last couple of years was to convince the electorate, to convince everybody in the EU that climate change is the big mandate of the EU, that climate change is the raison d'être of the European Union community. And I argue against this. This is one of our priorities, but the fundamental mandate of this union is the peace and prosperity on the continent. And I think we urgently need to reevaluate this direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitar. Otto, you have more of a free market approach. And from this perspective of yours, I would like to ask you to share a bit what's your take on the current energy policy of the European Union, especially when it comes to the role of regulation versus market mechanisms in achieving more cheaper energy for the citizens.
Thank you very much. I'm a strong believer in the subsidiary principle, but when it comes to climate change, we are dealing with basically a global externality, and that suggests that you should handle the challenges regarding climate change as high a level as possible. It means that this should be in Europe, this should be mainly a European concern, much more than a concern for the nation, for the member states, because it is basically a global externality. And I think it's very important that we realize that the EU has by far the most effective, cost-effective instrument available in fighting climate change, and that is the ETS, the permit trading system, which sets a price on emitting greenhouse gases, and by doing so, by setting a uniform price, by doing so, giving a uniform incentive to invest in green transition and to reduce emissions on all possible margins, using all possible technologies. That's the advantage of the system. This is done by using the price mechanism, giving a uniform incentive, basically, to drive the green transition. And furthermore, this thing is important. Now we're talking a lot about financing. When you're using, basically this system does not require any financing. Rather, we have a problem with so-called double regulation because we're trying to regulate the same emissions or trying to achieve the same goals by instruments which are basically stealing the effect from one another and making transition less effective. This is by a lot of command and control regulations. This is by subsidies, for instance, for green energy and so on. It's important to realize that we are not furthering the green transition by adding additional layers or regulations. Rather, we're making it much more expensive. If we want to achieve, and basically this is a question of how much green transition we want. This is a question of the targets we pick. When we do that, then the most efficient way of doing it is really to getting it into the price system and letting the system work. I think if we're looking at recent events, there's been a realization that some of the non-market instruments has been very expensive. The regulation, for instance, relating to the CSRD, which is basically very difficult to find a case for, but it's extremely expensive. We're seeing it's being reduced. Luckily, I think this is a step forward, also for the green transition and for energy policies. Just a few remarks on the role of the in terms of energy and other political goals than green transition. We have basically national energy markets, but we also have an integrated energy system, and there is a role for getting to regulate not the markets but basically the governments, national governments, to integrate our energy markets for more than we have, and there has been a tendency for national governments to put burdens on one another in the green transition, and there is a case for some regulation of governments by the EU.
Thank you. And since you've already mentioned the ETS, I would like you to continue a bit on the topic and tell us, how do you see this mix of subsidies that is proposed through the Omnibus and the ETS system? Is this a better way to achieve energy that is more affordable, or does it risk overburdening the people?
I think it's important to realize that there isn't the implicit or indirect subsidies in the ETS, because basically it's a price on emitting or using fossil fuels. So, and you're relieved of that price if you use renewables. So that's providing the incentives. Of course, green energy is more expensive than fossil fuels, and that means that it is more costly. You can reduce the cost to consumers by subsidizing, but the overall, the total cost to taxpayers is, if you subsidize energy, it's going to be much more costly to taxpayers in the long run, because it's counteracting the what you want to achieve with your climate and energy policies when you're supplementing with subsidies. But of course, it's what you can on the face of it, it looks more inexpensive, but you have to realize that there's a cost of the subsidy, which is making it much more costly to society. even if consumers can be can get better or cheaper energy in the short run.
Thank you. Bert, as far as I understand, the Affordable Energy Action Plan, together with the Omnibus, aims to stabilize the prices, but also to advance the transition. So, how does your modeling assure that this will lead to cleaner energy and to a system that keeps affordability at its core?
Many thanks. And indeed, I would like to have make 5 points about the energy transition, and to some extent as reply to some of my colleagues. And the first point is indeed we do modeling. I like numbers, and I like to use the numbers pretty right. And don't quote me exactly on the exact number, because I am not well prepared enough to have the exact number, but at least I'm not too far off. The first one is that in normal years we will have we as the EU import about 3% of our GDP in fossil fuels. This 3% of our wealth goes every year to partners that are not necessarily always working in our interests, to put it mildly. And in the energy crisis, this went up to about 4.5% of the GDP. Don't quote me, maybe 4.8, but that's about it. And on top of that, we talk about fossil fuel subsidies. No, we talk about subsidies for the green. We also publish as DG Ener a subsidies report, and fossil fuels get still a lot of subsidies. And fossil fuels got more than 1% of subsidies during the energy crisis. And there may be very good reasons to do that, to have done that during the energy crisis, because of the peculiarity of the situation in order to protect the citizens and the households and their bills. So there may be good reasons, but it's not just green energy that gets subsidies. Also fossil fuel sector and the fossil fuels as such get a lot of subsidies. I think that's an important point. Investments, I heard 10% of global of investment of global GDP, I think in the EU, if you look to our work.
Since 2010.
But you accumulate 15 years and you compare it to 1 year.
Just as a point of reference, but yes, you're completely right.
Okay, so that needs to be said. In the EU, it's about, the whole transition is about 2.5%.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Every year, yeah? Year through year. About half of it is investment that would happen anyway. So if we compare that to what we invested in the last decade, it's about half of it. So so the green transition is about 1%, 1.5% of the GDP that we do additionally of what we would have done anyway. Compare this to the 3% of fossil fuels that we are importing. The energy crisis. The high electricity prices and the high gas prices were because of basically gas dependency on certain countries. I mean, I don't think anyone will contest that. So I do disagree that green energy is more expensive. When we have high electricity prices nowadays, when we are in a new energy world, post-crisis energy world, but where we see that in the winter in many regions, not all, but in many regions in the EU, we see high energy prices and on a few moments, high electricity prices in a few moments in the winter. When there is no wind, when there is relatively high demand, and when there is no solar. What do? Well, we need to import gas, and then it's when actually our industry is facing very high in electricity prices. When we have a lot of wind or a lot of gas, like around New Year, we had a lot of wind, prices were almost zero. In the shoulder months, every weekend, from now onwards until October, every weekend we will have electricity prices which will be very low. Because the activity is a bit low, so there's less demand in the weekends. And in the summer, it's a large part of the year and the days, many days, we will have very low, even negative, because that's another challenge, negative electricity prices. Yeah, and in countries like Spain, it's a large part of the year. I mean, it's a huge part of the year. So I disagree that that green technology is more expensive than fossil fuels. However, the transition is difficult. Yeah, the transition is difficult, and not for every part of the activity, not for every process of the industry is cheaper. But for many activities, it's definitely green technologies, solar and wind, are definitely a cheaper option than gas or anything related, anything comparable. Third point, we heard about deregulation and the wish for deregulation. I think the Commission is talking about simplification. It has its targets clear for 2030, and unless the Council and the Parliament finds alternative agreements, they are there to stay. And I think it's important what we see about reporting about the social. I forgot the acronym, but the sustainability reporting. We see that companies want to have regulatory certainty. So we are now in 25. Changing anything up to 2030 is not necessarily a good sign of certainty and of the path to growth. I think when I compare to the investment levels in the energy sector in the last decade, 2011, 2020, they were particularly low in the energy sector. And one of the explanations is that the EU was searching for its path. So basically all the companies actually were waiting, what will it be? Shall we go to the left or to the right? And this in a sense expressed itself in lower investment levels because they were waiting to make the step in order to decide. So it's really important to keep to stay the course and to keep the direction and be clear on the communication of that. The next step is there. I mean, the energy sector is a sector with a very long lead time for projects, for deployment, for investment. And the first proposal or the proposal for 2040 will be tabled in the next few months. There's not an exact date yet, but the ambition level for the 2040 greenhouse gas target will be tabled very soon. Last year the recommendation was -90, and obviously energy being the most important part of the emissions is really core in this analysis. We have an impact assessment with a lot of numbers and a lot of modeling in order to frame what this actually means for the future energy. Fourth point I would like to make is about industry and the competition. I think what we have seen is over the last few years is that the competition is in clean technologies. So what we should avoid, and I agree with the colleagues that it's good that industry is back. Competition is important, or competition, or say prosperity is very important. But I don't think that climate change or energy transition and prosperity and peace are actually a trade-off between themselves. I think we need all of them at the same time. That's a challenge. That's a huge challenge. But we need all of them at the same time. And what we should avoid as the EU is some sort of Kodak moment, or if you want to have it more the Finnish version of it, the Nokia moment. The day before the smartphone came on the market, the day before the digital camera comes on the market. And it's exactly probably what we are seeing right now. China is competing with us not just on the steel sector and on basic goods, what they used to do for a longer period, but is competing us with the most advanced and the best electric cars that there are on the market, among the best. I mean, I don't want to have upset anyone here, but what I hear actually, I have no electric car myself, but what I hear is that they're really, really good. So they're competing us really on clean technology. They're competing with us on solar panels, which have now become a bulk product. They're competing with us increasingly on windmills. They're competing with us on electric cars. The final word has not said yet, but we have to be very, very careful. But we should avoid such a moment that we miss actually the momentum. And actually the IRA was a bit of the same. They were competing on clean tech with us, not just on anything else. So I think that's a fourth point. And then I had a fifth point, I think. No, I think I said my five point. It's just my numbering that is not right. I started with 0, so that's it. Thank you.
So before moving to the next question, do you want to answer to some of the points that he made?
Yeah, fantastic points by Bert. The most important message is that actually the geopolitical case for the transition in the EU is absolutely relevant. We don't want to be sending our wealth to the autocracies or the petrol state. So clearly, decarbonization has a huge role when it comes to our objectives. The thing about the transition electricity, true, we are a champion when it comes to clean electricity. But you're good with numbers, but it's good to remind the audience that electricity is only a quarter of all the energy we use in our economies, and things like gas and oil are not bad per se because they're the fundamentals behind manufacturing prosperity, industrial prosperity, not only about heating and about transport. And renewables are great with a huge caveat. You cannot base your economic model on this kind of energy, even if you have accelerating amounts of renewables. Why? Intermittency. Bert mentioned this, the Dunkelflaute in Germany. There was a huge scandal in the last couple of months when electricity prices in Germany went through the roof because of no wind, no sun. Because of this ripple effects, the Norwegian government fell because there was a huge fight in Norway. Do we want to be part of this model of electricity price setting? Because right now, Norway doesn't want to be part of our electricity market because of this volatility. Sweden right now is reconsidering interconnector with Germany exactly because of this volatility. The Swedish energy minister is very, very vocal about this. So it's the direction is there, but I don't see this as a fundament to our economic model. This is the big issue I have with renewables.
Can I?
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I think I need to respond to that. I think it's a bit of what you're observing is basically the market. You're promoting the market, the free market. That's very good. So the electricity market works that when there is demand, your prices go up. And basically, this is what's happening in Norway and Sweden. Is that they are lucky enough to have a lot of storage, to have very cheap electricity, and by connecting to Germany, they get an additional client. And this client, obviously, in the winter, in the Dunkelflaute, likes a lot of electricity, and this increases the price. So which is an excellent news for the Norwegian electricity company, because it's good for their shareholders, whoever that may be. But it's not such a good news for the consumers, because the Norwegians were used to have free electricity, and all of a sudden they see they have to pay for the electricity. So basically, it's here. So by saying they don't want to be connected is anti-market, I would say. I heard here something which is against the free market, because free market is about an exchange of goods, in this case electricity. It's a bit very simple. We will see very soon more expensive eggs. This is because the US is asking for our eggs. It's exactly the same thing. So we may decide to send them. We may not decide to send them. I don't know what leverage we have to do that. Obviously, we don't need transmission lines for that. But basically, this is what's happening. So it's not about the green or the energy transition as such, but it's about it's about of a redistribution between some have cheaper. Germany has cheaper prices, and which then leads to a bit more expensive prices in Norway. Another important thing is that the green transition, I think I forgot to mention that, but I think it's crucial, has increased the domestic production of energy in the EU. When you have solar panels and you have wind, you produce your energy within the borders. That's a point that Mr. Draghi made. I think most of us would rather be in favor of that, I guess. So so there's a lot of layers there. So I think it's important to really distinguish between what is ongoing, what seems to be the case, and what is really the case. Thank you.
Otto.
I wish I could share the optimism, because if it were so that that green energy were cheaper than the fossil fuels, then we would have very few problems. That we would be able to solve the energy crisis, the climate change issue, and so on, without really any need for any interventions. The ETS, as I mentioned before, which is basically a permit to emit CO2 from fossil fuels, they would have a very low price because people would be very willing to pay very little for it if greener energy were more inexpensive. I think it's important not to confuse the marginal cost of the electricity produced by a windmill or a solar panel with the real cost of green energy. It's true that when the wind is blowing, of course, the marginal cost of electricity is very, very low because the windmill is producing energy no matter what. The problem is that we need energy at specific times, we don't get a supply from wind and solar, which is stable, and it means that we have to convert a lot of the electricity to store it in some means. That is very expensive. We need some backup, and basically the most effective way of backing up wind and solar is natural gas. And then this is one of the reasons why we've become so gas dependent in Europe, is that it is very effective complement to wind and solar. So that's why we're depending on it. And so if you factor in all the costs, it is more expensive. There could be reasons why we should do it, but we should realize that it is more expensive, and we cannot solve our energy problems by simply subsidizing green energy. That would be extremely costly. There are trade-offs we have to realize. I think maybe the Commission has tend politically to overlook this, but there is a trade-off between security, volatility of the energy system, and the cost of climate change. Just one point on the subsidies provided by other governments, the Chinese and American government as well, subsidizing green energy. I don't see that as a problem. Well, I do see it as a problem. It's a problem for the Chinese, or it's a problem for the US who are subsidizing our green transition. But it's not a problem for Europe. There's no reason for us to subsidize green technology if we can buy it at a lower cost. So we should be pleased, basically, that the Chinese have been willing to make our transition less costly. It's not an argument for going into a subsidy war, rather on the contrary.
Okay, thank you. We have a question. Is it okay if we address it at the end, or? Okay, so then go ahead.
Thank you very much. So my name is Henrik Leitenberg. I work for the technology industries of Finland. For those of you who don't know TIF, we represent 1,800 companies working in sectors all the way from ICT to steel and metal production, machinery and mining, so including energy-intensive industries. And there's two things I would want to say. The first one is about the cost effectiveness of the energy transition. If you want to have a business case for the green transition in terms of industrial competitiveness, you can look to Finland. Finland has had a decarbonized electricity system, almost fully decarbonized since for a long time. We have the lowest electricity prices in Europe. For our companies, that means there is no point whatsoever in relying on fossil fuels because we have cheap and securely available electricity. Our industries are now going all in on electrification because it is the simple free market business choice to do. And those sectors in Finland that are still reliant on fossil fuels, these are the ones who are now having troubles and are trying to change course. So the idea that that fossil fuels are more cost competitive than decarbonized energy is simply not correct. I'm very sorry to say that. Where there is a big difference is between, let's say, those systems that did not electrify early enough and also those electricity systems that still relied on oil and gas rather than nuclear. That is the argument that you can make. But this artificial competition or tension between fossil fuels and decarbonized energy, this is not what we're seeing in industry, I'm very sorry to say. The second one, and this is also then important now in the context of simplification versus deregulation, they are not the same thing. That distinction is not often made, but it really has to be made. Because simplification is about keeping the level of ambition high, as Mr. Soin said, while making it easier for the actors involved of reaching that goal. Deregulation is about lowering the ambition without necessarily making the mechanisms to reach them easier. And that is essentially what we need to avoid, because obviously there's a lot of anxiety now about whether in the current geopolitical climate we can reach, for instance, the 2030 or even 2040 targets. But I had a discussion with one of our sustainable growth advisors on this, and they said, I think quite clearly that the question is, the worst thing we can do when dealing with the question of whether we reach the target or not is to revise those targets. Because, and this is again not a question of high-minded ideals, but it's about the signal you send to investors, it's the signal you send to industries about the efforts they should make in order to reach those goals. And so, again, this is why the distinction between simplification and deregulation is so important. If you keep the ambition level high, there is a chance that you might not reach it, but there is predictability for the actors involved, is that there's security to the investments that we make, to the changes that we make to the way we operate, because we know that this is what is going to happen. And I think in the context of the climate transition, it's even more important than in others, let's say, for instance, digitalization, where we have a bit of a different constellation, because climate transition is a ecological and, at the end of the day, humanitarian imperative. There is no competitiveness on a dead planet. So very simply put, essentially, it is important that we maintain the ambition level while making it easier for everyone involved to reach it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your input. I think Dimitar wants to reply to that.
Very, very quick point. The Finnish example is great. These are valid points, but Finland is a positive outlier. When we look at the global energy transition, Finland, Norway, Sweden, these are oddities. Because when you give these examples, which are absolutely true, they come from the starting base of Finland's geography, its specific energy mix, for the amount of money Finland has invested in the last decades. And Finland has reached this breaking point indeed, where clean energy makes sense. But for the rest of the world, for the rest of Europe, this is not the case. So this is just a positive outlier. That's only.
Thank you so much. And since we are with you here, Dimitar, I'm going to ask a question that relates to something that Otto has previously said. So the omnibus retools the energy policy post-Russia reliance, but you've previously in your publications questioned the broad gas reduction. Do you think it addresses voter concerns about costs effectively, or is it too climate-driven? What do you think?
On gas, many things can be said. Sometimes I get over emotional about natural gas, but here's the short story behind it. Ever since the crisis, and a huge chapeau and kudos goes to DG Ener and the efforts by the Commission when it comes to tackling the crisis, because we collectively showed that as a union there are energy efficiencies which can be improved. We can use collectively less energy as industries, as businesses, as households. So this was one of the big positive points of the energy crisis. The negative point of the energy crisis was that, especially in Brussels, we started to celebrate the fact that we're using less gas, even though this meant that a number of energy-intensive industries suffered heavy losses. There's been layoffs. Manufacturing industries in certain countries were facing huge challenges, specifically Germany and the UK, even though UK is out of the EU, but UK and Germany have been hit really hard because of the fact that their industries were deprived of the gas. And right now in Brussels, there's this narrative, oh, we tackled the problem, energy usage is going down, we're going to get the quotas, we're going to get the energy targets. I want to live in an EU which celebrates and promotes the transition, but not welcomes when our economies shrink collectively, so we fit the goals. This is my main concern. Second big concern I have is that we basically said by 2027 we're not going to use Russian gas, and we'll try to decouple from Russian gas. I think this is a great priority. This is a difficult job, but it's a very good priority. The problem is that this conversation again got hijacked by certain political groups in Brussels, in the EU, and they started to pivot the narrative, not only pivoting away from the Russians, which is good, but let's pivot completely away from natural gas in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And I think for me, this is a mistake, because every sensible, trustworthy decarbonization scenario we look at requires natural gas in the next couple of decades. As it was already mentioned by Otto, natural gas is a great source of baseload. It guarantees our energy supply and so many other examples. So I'm a bit worried that the conversation about pivoting away from the Russians turns into a conversation about completely negating natural gas in energy mix, which not only will be economically painful, but also it will cause huge problems for industry. Final point, Russian LNG. I like to give this example. As many of you know, around 20% of our energy, which is imported in the EU, comes from Russia. We don't really like this. But do you really think that the Belgians and the French and the Spaniards really want to get the dirty Russian gas? Do you think they really want to handle those crooks and the war criminals? They do not. But it's cheaper and it's available. And that's a problem. Our economies just simply need the gas, even if it comes from Russia. Look at the compromise we're doing just because our economies need gas. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to add something?
Well, I think I heard a lot of elements being said. With some of them I agree, with others I agree just a little less. Maybe a few points. You said that gas will be needed in the transition. I think we agree with that. Gas has always been considered the bridge between, say, a very fossil coal-based, coal-centered, oil-centered economy towards a renewable one, and we need gas to balance electricity systems, to cope with as capacity mechanisms in order to cope with Dunkelfloaters, and this is there, and I don't think that the Commission as such has moved away from that. Having said that, those balancing and those really necessary roles of gas are rather limited in volumes compared to the current volumes. So yes, we need them, but much less than we have now. Divided by 3 or something. Again, I'm speaking out of the top of my head. It's all in the impact assessments. Compared to before the energy crisis, we have reduced collectively in the EU 18% of our gas use. Some of them is really beneficial in the sense that energy efficiency, we are all a bit more aware about electricity use and heating and so on, replacement by windmills and solar panels. But yes, indeed, some of the industry has gone as well. But this was not a policy. This is not a policy choice. It is the effect of the energy crisis and gas being part of the war, basically. So it's not we all would like to get this industry back, and actually the Clean Industry Deal, in a sense, also addresses that issue to a large extent. But it was not a policy choice. It's an effect of geopolitical imbalances and geopolitical upheaval. I think we can also celebrate a couple of things in the EU, is namely in the worst situation we have ever experienced in the energy front since the 70s, and the first one since on gas, is that prices were very high, but we were able to deliver gas at every moment where we wanted to have it. So over the last 20-25 years, the EU has invested in a dense network of gas pipelines. They were able to switch the east-west flow in the opposite direction, the west-east flow, which was technically not that evident. We have the largest set of storages, about 100 BCM compared to current use of 320 BCM of gas, which helps us to balance the worst, or helps us to balance the gas price across the 4-5 months of winter. I think what we have seen, unfortunately, prices have come down. Prices have stabilized more or less, but we are on an LNG market. So prices, the natural gas market has changed very much in nature, because a pipeline market is very stable. You basically, I know the traders who were bored because nothing happened on the market, and they really enjoy it right now because prices change every day, just like the oil market. And that is what we're seeing now. Unfortunately, LNG, and the US definitely not walking away from gas because they walk away from the Russian gas, but they move. It's one of the cards we want to play with the Americans, maybe. But LNG in its nature is unfortunately it's more expensive than pipeline gas. Also, but again to the Norwegian electricity, we have to compete with the Chinese and the Japanese on the global market. So basically, we all converge to. If you look to the Chinese and Japanese prices, we are about in the same order. So it's a completely different market we have now. Thank you.
Thank you. And because I want to leave a few minutes for the questions, I just want to ask one question for all the three speakers, and I need you to answer in 1 minute. Should the EU focus more on nuclear energy as a solution to both affordability and sustainability concerns? And I'm going to start with Otto.
I'm agnostic about technologies. I think this should be we should not it should not be a political issue as such which technologies to adopt. This should be the market should answer depending on our pricing of basically our pricing of emitting greenhouse gases. So, but we should not prevent nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is a clean technology, and it should be up to the market to decide what the role should be for nuclear energy. It's not a political decision.
Yes, with a caveat. The EU is divided on this. 13, 14 member states have nuclear, the rest 13, 14 do not. This is absolutely a national prerogative. So the countries which pursue nuclear in their energy mix, go ahead, do it. The ones who do not wanna, go ahead, don't do it. Of course, the German scenario was a strategic mistake, I think, my personal opinion. This is again up to their own policymakers to decide. In Europe, I would support keeping the current reactors going, making sure that they're decommissioned as far away in the future as possible. I am aware that we maybe cannot build en masse nuclear reactors given the costs, given the security. The thing I would like to see is more research into more money into breakthrough research. The small modular reactors, the fact that we have amazing French and Finnish industry doing amazing things on nuclear, but because of national political lobbies, European money doesn't reach these countries because there's national considerations. So long story short, keep nuclear going, but make sure that we're pushing in the proper direction R&D. Look at the Chinese, by the way. They're really trying to steal Russia's lunch. They're investing heavily in nuclear, buying uranium stocks and whatnot, because they see a future of this industry globally. So let's make sure that we don't stay behind. Thank you.
Okay. Well, nuclear is very is always an interesting topic to discuss. It's good to remind that actually nuclear is at the start of the EU. It's a Euratom Treaty was one of the bases of the EU. So it is absolutely there. The EU also has its responsibilities in nuclear research. We have the Joint Research Center, which is part of it. It's also part of the MFF, the Multi-Annual Financial Framework. So it really has a role there. Nevertheless, it indeed, I agree with what you're saying. It's very much a national responsibility. I heard the word subsidiarity, and I think it's a clear example, and the court has actually confirmed that the energy mix as such is the responsibility of the member state. So indeed, say half is in favor and half is against, and I don't think we will convince the French to become anti-nuclear and the Austrians to become pro-nuclear. So we as the EU will need to navigate this diverse panorama of nuclear affinities, say, and make it come with policies that are where nuclear can have a role, but nuclear being decided at the national level. In all our scenarios, we have up to 2050, nuclear has a role. Yeah? But I think it's very important, and I would like to call for a fair and honest debate here. For 2040, we don't see a lot of nuclear coming on top of what has already been decided. I mean, the lead times of energy are very long, but I think the lead times of nuclear are probably even longer. So I think we have already a reasonably well, right now we will publish in a couple of months this Plan Indicatif Nucléaire. It's French, so it's a really old process in the Commission. So it's basically a stock take of what nuclear is doing in the EU, including from energy, but also looking to, say, medical isotopes and so on. And it's really important that we have a good understanding what will come there. And in 2040, we will have not really additional nuclear, maybe a little bit, but not really game changer. We also have to be very careful with like promises like the SMRs. I mean, people are talking a lot about SMRs, but I think very few people really understand what is behind. And also, we really don't know what are the cost advantages and the permitting issues and so on. So I think many of the problems are still there. I mean, many of the discussions of nuclear are still there. The debate also needs a very honest debate, and I think in many countries, and including my own country, this one, Belgium, the debate is not being done really on facts on costs. People say nuclear is cheap. No, an extension of an existing 50-year-old plant is cheap, relatively cheap. Add another 10 years, fine. But after those 10 years, you may think of building a new one. And this is missing in the debate. And this is not cheap, and as you were saying, it's definitely not cheap. But having said this, nuclear energy can have a role. It has a couple of properties, like for the Dunkelfloaters, which could come handy, for the flexibility, for the storage throughout the seasons, throughout the year, that could come handy. But these are very important political trade-offs that are not being made at the EU level.
Thank you so much. I think we are a bit over, so if it's okay, you can ask the question afterwards. I'm sure any of the speakers will gladly answer to you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the speakers for this debate. It's clear that we all agree that we need energy that works for businesses and citizens. And maybe we disagree on some of the things, but this discussion brought a bit more clarity. Also, there is a report that you might want to check. It's called Energizing Europe and was published by Epicenter. Otto is one of the authors. Maybe you find some interesting ideas there as well. It's on the Epicenter website. Thank you all for being here, and let's give our speakers some applauses.